Hi, everyone. I'm Stan Mallow, the paranormal yacker. My guest on today's show is ancient aliens believer, biblical intellectual, and critically acclaimed author Wallace Wagner. I'll be talking with Wallace about his book, Within Grasp, My Evolving Journey Discovers More Truth Behind the Bible. Wallace Wagner, welcome to Paranormal Yacker.
Well, thank you, Stan. I'm very glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Within Grasp, Wallace, is your second book that's based on a 2016 TikTok UFO sighting you had and how it caused you to reevaluate your life. That book is Crossing the Crevasse. Since Within Grasp is a continuation of the first one, can you tell me how that initial 2016 TikTok sighting came about?
At the time, I was a mailman, a rural carrier, and I had just made a delivery to a carport, and I was walking back to my Jeep. This was September of 2016, and something told me to stop and look up. And that's exactly what I did, standing out in front of the house in the front yard, and right over my head, approximately, I'm going to say 1,500 feet, was the proverbial white Tic Tac. It appeared as a solid, gleaming white object with no nacelles, no wings, no windows, nothing of the sort, just a solid object. And just like the Tic Tac meant. So I put a picture of that on both of my books. I saw it for about 3 seconds, Stan, and then it either disappeared, went into another dimension, or cloaked. And I've spent a lot of time thinking, well, which one of those three was it? And I'm fairly convinced it cloaked. When you think of going into another dimension, you might think of like a portal opening. None of that happened. It was a crystal clear day with just one or two small clouds around. If it would have taken off, something tells me, well, I might have gotten a glimpse of it. Or perhaps if it had regular technology, I would see maybe a little indentation in the cloud next to it. None of that. There was no sound, nothing. I'm of the opinion that it cloaked right in front of my eyes. It was still there, but I could not see it. And of course, all the questions came about, what did I see? Was it a Google craft taking pictures of the Earth? Was it a Goodyear blimp, weather balloon? All of that went through my brain, but none of that fit. And then a year and a half later, of course, we got the glimpses of the Tic Tacs on TV from the Navy. So I was vindicated after that. That's because that's exactly what I saw.
It is apparent from your writings, Wallace, that you have come to the realization that Jesus should be looked at more as a teacher. The Bible as written is not what it's purported to be. And in fact, you found that some of the topics in the Bible don't jive. Could you expand on that?
Oh, that's a loaded question. I came from a very conservative Baptist and Methodist background. Even hearing phrases like all the UFOs are from the devil. If you don't believe the earth is 6,000 years old, then you really need to re-examine your salvation, because that's exactly what the Bible says. It's about as conservative and literal as you can imagine. But I've always been interested in science fiction. I'm a Star Trek fan. Having seen this right over my head just changed reality for me in an instant. It made me go back and reread the Bible, and I looked at it through a different lens. I also did a lot of biblical history studying, as well as studies of other religions. And none of this was even in my repertoire before the sighting, not even being an author, of course. But it literally changed everything for me. I have realized since the sighting that the Bible has been manipulated so many times that what we see today is, who knows what it was 2,000 years ago. An example, Elohim, plural with the I-M on the end, was in the Hebrew Bible over 2,500 times. In our Bible today, 0. Now, Elohim created the heavens and the earth, plural, gods, both male and female. Now, the reason that was taken out, females were second-class citizens back then, and we wanted to support the one God theory, the one male God. Along those lines, Asherah or Ishtar was also taken out. Asherah was highly venerated by the Hebrews, even during Solomon's time and Solomon's son's time. This is beyond reproach by all the scholars. There's been too many statuettes threats and things found to support her. She was venerated right up there with who the Israelites called their God. And of course, that got removed. But now in the NIV, she's been reinserted 40 times. So she's made a comeback. She's also been venerated in a lot of the other Bibles that are out there. And Jehovah's has been removed. Jehovah was only in the King James Version 7 times. It was never mentioned. He was never mentioned in any of the other versions. And now Jehovah's been removed and Asherah has been inserted. So that's a change. I had mentioned looking through a different lens. So much of this stuff is not discussed in your Sunday school class or in Bible studies. It's left out or glossed over. You pretend like it's not there. But if you back up and reread the Bible, looking for clues and looking for UFOs and crafts, they start in Genesis and don't end until Revelation. Many, many, many examples. I had mentioned that I thought the tic-tac cloaked in front of my eyes. Well, that's biblical. That's in 2 Kings when Elisha prayed and his servant was blind. The servant had his eyes opened, and lo and behold, all around Elisha's, all these chariots of fire that he could not see before, that they were there. And you have all of these gods, not only in our Bible, because Elohim was plural, but in all the other religions. Hinduism, Buddhism, those were actually older than Christianity. And they all had gods coming down from the sky. And they just didn't free fall. They came in crafts. All of them came in crafts around the world in all cultures at all times. That's something that is not talked about in my Baptist and Methodist background. You strictly stick with Jesus and what's in the Bible. And it's a very narrow-minded focus. It's been now too narrow for me. I've gone beyond the gates of Western Christianity, and I'm on a path. I have Reverend Michael Carter to thank.
You, Wallace, as you just mentioned, grew up in a Southern conservative Methodist Baptist environment. That being the case, I'm sure many family members, friends, neighbors, business associates had the same upbringing. How did they react to the opinions and comments you've expressed about established Western Christianity?
I'm going to answer you honestly, of course.
Thank you.
Most of them I don't know because I have changed. I no longer consider myself Baptist or Methodist. In fact, I have a hard time relating to any organized religion. I have become much more spiritual and a lot less religious. So at the time I saw the craft, I was teaching Sunday school. You're looking at maybe 8 people in the room. They took it seriously, better than I thought they would. I only told a few other friends and some family members. Then, of course, when it came out in 2017 on TV, I just let everybody know that's exactly what I saw. But since my re-examining of the Bible stand, I can be Baptist one Sunday and Lutheran the next Sunday and Methodist the next Sunday and a disciple of Christ the next Sunday. I just go around to whichever church I want to go to now. Basically enjoy the music and who I see and critique the preacher. I consider myself somewhat of a Bible scholar now. I've studied so much that I pretty much know what's right and what's wrong and whether or not he or she is connecting the dots appropriately. Basically, I just sit there and critique the preacher. My focus is no longer on the old Hebrew God, Yahweh or Jehovah. I'll just go ahead and relate. My studies have taught me there's 2 main lines of thought on Yahweh. And one is, of course, he was a Canaanite or a Kenite God, a smelting copper God. And the other is that he was a god of the Shasu, which were a nomad tribe in and around the Levant. In any case, he was just a local god that ended up getting adopted and as time went morphed into the Israel God or the Hebrew God. Nowhere in the New Testament does Jesus call Yahweh or Jehovah his father. It's never mentioned. Jesus's father was mentioned as Abba or Father, or as James says, Father of lights. And if you look comparatively between the two, they're day and night difference. Yahweh was responsible for thousands of murders, men, women, children, as the Israelites moved towards Canaan. It was really bad. I mean, they were not indoctrinated. They weren't imprisoned. They weren't given other land to live on. They were killed in situ. It was going totally against what the 10 Commandments had given to Moses. I had a hard time with that, but now I know that God is not my God. My God is universal now, that exists in spirit only, which is exactly what the New Testament says. My God does not need a craft to move around in, or my God does not walk on the earth. And I better stop before I get myself in trouble.
When did ancient aliens first visit our planet? What were the reasons for coming here? And what role did they play in the development and advancement of various civilizations here on Earth?
The fact of the matter is we are still here, and that says a lot. They're a lot more advanced than we are. If they did not want us here right now, we would not be here. So that plays into, for me, they all came to share their knowledge and to teach us. They picked us up where we were in many cases, taught us what they knew, then for whatever reason, departed. That has played out. You ask how long. I've got probably 2 lines of thought on that. One is that this earth has had incarnations or generations of beings, maybe going back as long as 300,000 or 400,000 years. This most recent generation probably goes back to after the Ice Age, and you could track that back to somewhere maybe around 11 or 12,000 years ago. We've had all of these beings from different sources, different constellations come here. They've all come in crafts. Most of them have come in crafts. There may be 1 or 2 if you're into different dimensions that could just appear, but they were summons to appear. But they came here to teach us and show us that there's more life than what we experience here on Earth while we reside in our bodies, which are just mere vessels. There's a lot more to life than what we are force-fed with every day.
What happens at death? Where do we go when the soul and spirit leaves the physical body? Do we reincarnate? Those are questions everyone asks themselves. You address them Within Grass. What, Wallace, are the answers to those questions?
You're going to get answers directly from Wallace. I cannot promise you they are 100% correct, but I can tell you what resonates with me. I've studied a lot of near-death experiences Within Grasp. I interviewed Reverend Barbara DeLong, who really gave a really detailed description of a near-death experience. I believe they are real. I believe in reincarnation. So let me talk about reincarnation first. Reincarnation was actually accepted in the early church. Origen had his own beliefs on reincarnation, and Origen at one time was actually called the brightest mind that early church ever had. And by the time it got to Jerome around 400 AD, Jerome cut all of the reincarnation stuff out. After that, later cut out more. The only thing we have left to really give a glimpse into what reincarnation is, who was John the Baptist? He was Elijah. And we see Elijah again in the Transfiguration. And if you believe he's one of the 2 end-time prophets, he will come back yet again, according to Malachi. For me, we were alive before we were born. That's biblical. It's not what you're taught, but it's still in the Bible. God knew us before we were born. Many people today think, well, you were just created and put into this body, and you have this one life to live. And after this, you're all walking on streets of gold with God for eternity. I don't buy that at all anymore. I believe that we're our children. We are sons of the real God, sons and daughters of the real God. This is mentioned throughout the New Testament and the Old Testament, that God has multiple sons, regardless of what the Apostles' Creed says now, God's only son. That's hogwash. We're all sons and daughters of God. Jesus was just much, much more advanced than we are. I look at him now as a brother and as a teacher, as you had mentioned earlier. And if you look at John 14, the second part of John 14, the first part we always hear at the funeral, but they never finish. The second part says, when I go to the Father, you will actually do works and miracles greater than what I have done. Now, I don't know anybody that's done works or miracles greater than what Jesus has done. That must pertain to our future or another life. Now, let's talk about the near-death experiences. There's been too many people, way too many people, and lots of books written on this subject. Typically, when you die, your spirit leaves the body almost instantly, normally through the head. I have been taught that the spirit and soul are the same from a Methodist standpoint. There are others out there that would say they actually are separate. I'm not going to get into into that, the soul leaves. For a while, you're floating. You're in darkness. For a while, you think you're all alone. You don't know what to do, but you realize that you still have your mind. You're still who you are. You just don't have your body anymore. In some cases, you can look down and see your body from where you just left it, and you're floating. You realize you can move. You realize you're in some type of a tunnel. Then you see a light or you see someone. This someone might be one of your family members that preceded you. You always have a guide, Stan. All these instances, you always have a spiritual guide. Now, this guide can, since everybody's spirit at this point, can take the form of even a dog that you had before, or one of your family members, or whatever makes you feel comfortable. You're heading towards your guide. So you're in this spiritual world now, and you have your guide. You normally have the whole recount of your life. You'll be shown what you did right, what you did wrong. As far as going to hell, unless you really screwed up, there is no hell. That goes against the grain of Christianity today. But hell is really if you're taken one-on-one by your guide and you're kept away from all the others. When I say all the others, when you're in your spirit form, you're in a place where there's spirits everywhere, and you have your spiritual group, a group of your friends, pretty much on the same level as you are. And they all have these experiences, and you share almost like a sit-down Bible meeting. Each of you share what happened in your previous life, and you all try to learn from that. So you have these groups of fellow spiritual people who are really your best friends, because you're home when you're in your spirit. You're with God in that realm when you're in the spirit. It's when you incarnate into a body, and it doesn't have to be on earth, by the way, into a body. You do that to learn, emotionally learn. So you have senses, you can touch, you can feel, you can taste. It's a training for your soul as you slowly develop. I don't want to say increase your awareness, but let's say increase consciousness. Your guide is nowhere near the level of Jesus. He's just one or two levels above you. He has learned to a point to where he's a teacher. And you have all these different levels. And levels are again mentioned in the book of Enoch, in 2 Corinthians, in our New Testament, when Paul mentioned he saw someone go to the third level. You have these levels. And I'm going to leave that up to the audience to understand what the levels are. But I believe it's different elevations as you get closer to God. And that's pretty much, in a nutshell, what resonates with me right now.
Just about every religion or belief system seems to have their own concept of an almighty God, the great creator, such as who is God? Where did God come from? What is the purpose of God? How does God affect and influence mankind? I'm curious to know, Wallace, how would you define God?
3 ways. First of all and foremost, a love that we cannot understand. We call it agape here in the South, but the correct pronunciation is actually agape. It's a love that has no bounds. It's infinity, unmeasurable amounts. And that's really what I feel permeates the entire universe. God is love, God is spirit, and God is light. I will bank on all 3 of those, with love being the best attribute.
Within Grasp includes interviews you've had with a number of fascinating people. I will now be asking you about some of them. Dr. Reverend Barry Downing was the first pastor to publicly expose UFOs in the Bible. When did he do this, and what did he base it on?
He had always had an open mind. He grew up in a house where his father would bring home magazines like from Kehoe and some people like that. So he always had an open mind. This happened back in the mid to late 60s. He made an agreement with God that if he could get a job and get through seminary, then he would publish what he really thought about the UFOs. Especially his forte is Moses, in the wilderness, crossing the Red Sea, and whatnot. That was done by crafts, extraterrestrial crafts. He got his job soon after he graduated, so he ended up publishing in 1968 UFOs in the Bible, and we'll just take it from there.
Reverend Michael J.S. Carter, currently the pastor of a Unitarian Universalist congregation in North Carolina, is someone I've had the privilege of having as a guest on my show. Really incredible, wonderful person. You have an interview you did with him in your book. What did he tell you about his miraculous healing and the visitations he has experienced?
Reverend Michael Carter is my friend. He just got married, by the way, last Saturday, and I was fortunate enough to get to go to the wedding. in Asheville. He's my mentor. He's the real deal.
Absolutely.
When he walks into a room, the room brightens. I had a sit down with him in Asheville after I wrote my first book, and he told me about his visitations and his healing, and I totally believe him. The main visitation was when he had the healing. He had a blood clot in his leg, Stan, and his leg became swollen, basically from the groin area all the way down to the ankle. So he was on heparin and some other drugs. He had to give himself shots every day. And this was going on for weeks, and nothing was happening. And one night he went to bed and he sensed this being in the room with him. And he turned over and saw this large being dressed in almost a brown monk robe standing beside him. He could tell he had on a light blue shirt, but he was very muscular. What happened was he held out his hand. Out of the palm of his hand came this chartreuse green ray, hit him in the stomach, and then the fella dematerialized instantly. Not a matter of hours, but instantly. He looked down and his leg was going back to normal size. In no time, it was back to normal size, and he had to tell someone. So he called his friend Preston Dennett up on the West Coast, who was still awake, and told him what happened. And it ended up in Preston's book, Miraculous Healings of UFOs. He went back to the doctor, and the doctor said, "How did this happen?" And Michael could not tell that doctor exactly what happened. So he basically turned the tables and says, "Aren't you glad for me that this happened? Aren't you glad that I'm now healed?" So the healing was instant and it was permanent. That just plays into my belief we're not alone. We've never been alone. And these other beings from other worlds who are more advanced than we are can make themselves appear here. This was a case where this fellow just appeared in the bedroom, not aware of a craft being outside, although Michael had seen crafts when he was in Mexico earlier. I will just leave it at that. It has really stuck with me, and that entire story is in my book.
Project Stargate remote viewer Dr. Paul H. Smith, who was a major in the U.S. Army, now retired, shared a number of things with you, including some of his Mormon beliefs. What did he share with you, and how did his Mormon beliefs factor into the dialogue you had with him?
I asked him if his Mormon beliefs actually interfered with his remote viewing. Actually, they did not. It actually, if anything, supported his Mormon beliefs. He has remained a stout Mormon his whole life and has even held, leadership positions in that faith. I do not consider that faith a cult. I know a lot of people do. To me, it's no more a cult than any of the other 33,000 Protestant denominations out there, Christian denominations that are out there. His claim to fame really was the USS Stark. When he remote viewed, and he was in the remote viewing projects for 20 years, he actually saw the entire USS Stark incident days before it happened, verbatim, put it in a file cabinet. And then after it happened, they went to the file cabinet and pulled it out. And here was everything that exactly happened on paper that he saw. Remote viewing is real. I want the listeners to know that, even though the CIA and whatnot, the Department of Defense supposedly are no longer involved, we know it's real and that it worked. It has worked lots of times, many times, and a good remote viewer is somewhere in the neighborhoods of 80% correct. What it entails is, in a way, leaving your body, where you take your mind, your brain, and your essence, and you're able to move, and you can go forward, and you can go through objects of mass. What you see, you have an interpreter. You often write down, and then once you're done with the session, you examine what you have written down. It might be a picture of something or a picture of a pyramid, and you can just draw a pyramid. That's the way that works. I've mentioned to him, if you go way out into space, does time affect it? And the answer is no. You can go as far out as you want. If your interpreter gives you coordinates for the planet Pluto, for example, you can instantly be and instantly see what's on Pluto. There is no time lag. Other interesting things are that there are maybe 4 or 5 really good remote viewers, and he was one of them. You can actually see the future, but it's a little cloudy because of what's called decision nodes. A decision node is like when you always go out to your car at 8 o'clock in the morning. But this particular morning, you get out on the front porch and realize you forgot your wallet and came back in. You get it. You go back to your car and you're 3 minutes going down the road later than you normally are. You're behind trying to wreck now. So would you have been in that wreck if you would have been 3 minutes earlier? So this decision note is something that can change, in his opinion, the future. So the future really isn't necessarily set in stone because of these decision nodes. I know that kind of goes against a lot of what maybe John Calvin taught, but I do believe it. We have a say-so in our future by the decisions we make. Also, the further you go out, the cloudier it seems to be as far as getting an exact handle on what's out there. And I'll let that rest for now.
Spiritual empath Barbara DeLong, who is also an author, documentarian, and artist, is someone you had an in-depth interview with. You covered a number of interesting subjects. Could you tell me about some of them?
Well, I mentioned the near-death experience. Let me allude on that just a little bit. She had a really good friend who had cancer, and she knew she was going to die. They both knew she was going to die. And the friend actually died one morning about 3 o'clock in the morning. This friend had asked Barbara to go with her. And of course, Barbara did not know what she meant. It ended up being that Barbara found herself in a dark tunnel with her at 3 o'clock in the morning. Lo and behold, here comes this little dog. The little dog jumps up on both of them and starts licking them and gets dog slobber on them both. Sooner, right after that, they start seeing the proverbial light and some people. And Barbara says, well, I guess your guide is here now. I need to go back home. The friend asked for her to stay, but she said she had other things to do. So she left her. Barbara found herself waking up in bed a little later after 3 in the morning, covered in dog slobber. Not sweat, but dog slobber. And this was real. That really tells me these near-death experiences and what happens when you die is really real. She's had lots of interesting experiences. She really did a really good documentary on the stones of New England. We often are not aware, but there's megalith stones and stone creations all through the Northeast that were there even before the Indians were there. Some of the stones are 50, 60, 70 tons, really eclipsing the Great Pyramid, but we seldom hear about it. She did a whole documentary on it that is on YouTube. I highly recommend somebody to look that up. I can't remember the exact address, but if you do Barbara DeLong stones, I'm sure something will come up that you can watch. It's very, very informative and very, very well done. She's also done a lot of work with people who have had regression type analysis and that type thing. So she's fully aware that reincarnation does exist. And we both kind of sort of share in that God is this spirit, a spirit plasmatic energy that is full of love, full of light, that is out there in the universe, and that we all belong to it. That's what I will share with the audience right now.
Also included within Grasp are 4 books not in our present day Bibles. What are the names of these books? What are they about? And what were the reasons for them being left out of the Bibles we use in our religious houses of worship today?
I included the Book of Thomas, the Book of Enoch, the Gospel of Mary, and lastly, the Apocalypse of Baruch. The first 3 were left out because they simply didn't fit. And of course, we just found a couple of them recently, but they might be considered one of the challenges of early Christianity was what do we do with all the Gnostics and the Gnosticism? It basically got weeded out. But the Gospel of Thomas is in there because I believe Thomas actually got what Jesus was trying to teach. In a way, it's really out there. It's totally mind, spiritual, has to do with the brain, that type of thing, and with your essence. It is really out there. I think that I wanted people to see it basically because of what happened with the Apostle Paul. Paul had the Damascus Road experience, and we think that he immediately became an apostle. Well, that did not happen. He had to go to Saudi Arabia for 3 years for training. We don't know who trained him. Some people think it might have been Jesus. But after he had that 3 years of training, he came back to be an apostle, and he had powers then he did not have before. Such as he was able to make Elymas blind, for example, just by looking at him. He did not have those powers before. My point was being that we have all these untapped powers of our brain, and I believe Thomas got some of those powers. And Jesus was a teacher. That's why I put the Gospel of Mary in there. Mary Magdalene called Jesus Rabboni, or rabbi, or teacher. And I'm of the belief, this is personal, that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were actually husband and wife, but I don't get into that. I do know that throughout the New Testament, whether it was Judas or whether it was Nicodemus, all the apostles pretty much called him rabbi, and that means teacher. He was their teacher. And that was the first thing he did after he rounded up the disciples, was to start teaching them. Of course, he healed also, but I focus on the teaching point. The Apocalypse of Baruch is in there because I thought it related so closely to the book of Revelation. And Baruch, of course, was the scribe of none other than Jeremiah. And if you have the Apocrypha, you probably know of Baruch anyway. But the Apocalypse plays hand in hand with what happens in the end times, as far as I'm concerned. It meshes with Revelation, so it kind of supports it. If you're wondering if Revelation was just all myth, or whether it was going to happen, or whether it's 10,000 years in the future, you might get some more underpinnings or a better foundation by reading the Apocalypse of Baruch. And the book of Enoch is in there because all of the apostles knew of the book of Enoch. The book of Enoch is mentioned verbatim in Jude. And I had mentioned earlier that Paul knew someone who went up to the third heaven. Well, the third heaven is where we all go according to the book of Enoch. If you had not read the book of Enoch, you would not know what the third heaven was. I've had many preachers try to tell me it's up above the stratosphere, up above where the birds fly. It's actually a spiritual place where we go, where we all go when we pass. And that's why that's in there. And you're going to learn names of all the angels, lots of angels' names. There's more than just the 3 or 4 that were given in the Bible. There's angels that were responsible for virtually everything that happened and that is happening now. So that's why those books are in there, just to give some extra credence to that we're not taught all of reality, and all of reality is not in the Bible.
Should viewers of Paranormal Yacker want to buy Within Grasp or any of your other books, how can they do that?
They're all on Amazon. If you type in Within Grasp, My Evolving Journey, it comes right up. It's available on Kindle and in hardcover. It will be available on books on tape probably within another 4 to 5 weeks. I'm in the process of having that done and read now. The other book, Crossing the Crevasse, is on there in a grayscale, as well as a full color rendition. The original Crossing the Crevasse was an 8.5 by 11 in full color. And of course, being in color makes it exponentially more expensive. That's why I backed down and put an 8 by 10 grayscale in there. All of those are available on Kindle as well. Also have the website, Stan, Within Grasp.
Perfect.
That can fill everybody in with what is Within Grasp.
Wallace Wagner, I thank you for being my guest on Paranormal Yacker. It was most informative yakking with you. I wish you success with all that you do.
Thank you very much, Stan. I have totally enjoyed this. Have a great day.
Hi, everyone. This is Stan Mallow, the Paranormal Yacker. I hope you enjoyed the interview you just watched. To be sure you're amongst the first to receive new interviews when they're released and to have access to previous ones, subscribe to my free YouTube channel. To do that, all you have to do is press the subscribe button on your screen.